All right, let's turn to Genesis 37. Genesis 37. A little bit of review here as we consider starting the last section of the book of Genesis, Genesis 37. Joseph's brothers hated him for 4 reasons. What are the 4 reasons why Joseph's brothers hated him? Do you remember from last week? Anybody? Okay, the coat. That's number 3. What else? Well, he was honest. He was honest about it. You know, he said snitch, and some people say he's a talebearer or he's a, tattletale or whatever it is. But no, I think he was honest, and I think we don't do him justice if we say otherwise. So his coat upset them, and also his honesty upset them. What about why did he have a coat? Yeah, he was a favorite of his father, and so that upset them. And the 4th thing has to do with God, and that is, what was Joseph having all the time? Dreams. He was having dreams. And so we see here these dreams, I think the brothers understood were from God, and I know the father understood they were from God. And these dreams said that one day all of us, the brothers, are going to bow down before this little runt, Joseph. And they didn't like it. And so let's go to verse number 12 as we start today. This is an honest guy, Joseph. And so his father's going to send him to go check on his brothers again. And it's in an earthly sense, it's not going to go well for Joseph. But in a heavenly sense, it's according to God's plan. And so let's start in verse number 12. And Joseph's brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, Here am I. The obedient son, right? And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And so here is Jacob, Joseph's fathers, saying, Where in the world are your brothers? We haven't heard from them. We want to make sure your brother's okay, and we also want to make sure the flocks are okay. So we see him going to check on the flocks and check on his brothers. Okay. All right. So he went to Shechem, which is north of Hebron, quite a ways. And then it says in verse number 15, And a certain man found Joseph, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, They are departed hence, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. And so let's say Hebron is about 20 miles away, and then Dothan's about 20 miles further away. So I think people in that day must have been able to walk a lot better than we can today. Imagine walking, maybe 40 miles, and with the flocks, going with them, the brothers, and then Joseph on his own. But so they were pretty far from home. And so what they're about to do, they could get away with, especially in that time. There were no cameras, right? Okay. All right, verses 18 and 19. And when they saw him, Joseph afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, the guy with the coat cometh. Is that what it says there? No. It says, Behold, the dreamer cometh. And I think this is interesting. Joseph was spotted far away as he was coming to Dothan, and he had on this coat. And so I would say if the sun is shining just right on that coat of many colors, they could see him coming from far off, and they knew exactly who it was. Maybe, he was singing as he came because he was a child of God and children of God sing, but definitely that multicolored coat shined in the sun. And what did his brothers do? They fantasized about how they were going to kill him. And that's where all wrong actions start, with wrong thoughts. And so they're thinking about how they can kill him. And they say, Behold, the dreamer cometh. I believe that the main reason that they hated Joseph so much is because they knew that their younger brother was going to one day rule over them, and that God had decreed this, and they did not want that to happen. And so their biggest beef, I believe, wasn't with Joseph, but it was with who? It was with God. Because God was giving him these dreams, telling him, you're going to one day rule over your brothers and your parents. So what's going to happen to Joseph? Will his brothers' anger go away, or will they act upon it? The drama continues. Verse 20. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit, and we will say some evil beast has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And you almost hear a after that. I love the way the King James words that. They continue their fantasizing about how to get rid of their brother, and they say, we can kill him, we can throw him into a well, and we can tell folks back home that an animal has eaten him up. An animal has devoured him. And once again, why do they hate their brother so much? They say, we shall see what will become of his dreams. Ultimately, what they're doing is they're trying to thwart the will of God. That's what they're ultimately trying to do. And one of the most frustrating things in life that we can participate in is trying to overturn the will of God. Things are going to happen in our lives. When there are tornadoes or there are hurricanes or stuff like that, what do they call those? The insurance companies call them acts of God. There are things that are going to happen in our lives that we have absolutely no control over. And when we can't control it, who's in control? God. God is in control. And so one day, you may find yourself, my fellow chaplain up at the prison, he was just walking through a door, and all of a sudden the sliding door hit him on the side. And he started having these spasms in his back and his neck. And then another day it's raining outside, and he's running from one building to the other. And it's raining, and he wants to jump over that puddle that's in front of him so he doesn't get his feet wet. Well, he's 75 years old. He's having back spasms and neck spasms. What do you think is going to happen when he tries jumping over that puddle? He face plants right into the concrete. Now listen, he can get mad about that. He can get upset about that. Why did you let it rain? Why did you let that door hit me? But ultimately, who's in control? God. And like I often say here, in acceptance lieth peace. One day you might get a diagnosis. You have cancer, you're going to die. And you can get all angry at God, get mad all you want. But in acceptance lieth peace. So Joseph is having these dreams. Are they going to be able to overturn the will of God? No. But they're frustrated because they're trying to overturn God's will. And we shall see what will become of his dreams. That is the main thing they hate him for. Because they know down deep in their heart that God has a plan for Joseph, and that Joseph one day is going to be greater than they are. Any thoughts on that? Any questions or thoughts? All right. Verse 21 and 22. Reuben to the rescue. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. So Reuben, which son is he? He's the oldest son. Reuben, perhaps knowing that he would ultimately be held responsible for whatever happens. That's what happens when you're the oldest child, right, Trey? Okay, you're the oldest child. You're responsible for watching your younger brothers, right? And so Reuben, is trying to dissuade his brothers from killing Joseph. let's just throw him in a pit and let's cool off a little bit, okay, fellas? And it says the reason why Reuben wanted to throw him in a pit was to deliver him to his father again. Now, once again, there are a lot of commentators on the Bible who would speculate as to why Reuben wanted to save his brother alive. Some would say it's because Reuben, if you remember, went into his father's handmaid, Bilhah, which was his father's wife, and had immorality with her, had immoral relations with her, and that he was trying to win back the favor of his father, and maybe, he could do this by bringing his son Joseph, rescuing him from his other brothers. But that's all speculation, okay? Why don't we just say that Reuben here had a noble and honorable desire, and he wanted to bring his younger brother back to his father alive instead of bringing his carcass back dead, okay? So Reuben, he is kind of a little bit of a hero in this situation. He's the oldest brother, and he tries to get calmer heads to prevail. All right, verses 23 and 24. And it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. So Joseph arrives. And what is the one thing that represents their father's favoritism toward Joseph? That coat of many colors. And so they take that coat of many colors, and they take it, and they probably rip it up, and they probably spit on it. They take it off of him, and then they throw him into a well where there's no water. So they take the coat, and they probably misuse the coat, and then they throw him into a well that had no water in it. All right, so what do they do then? Are they tore up about it? Are they concerned about their younger brother? No. Verse 25. And they sat down to eat bread. Yeah, they were just really cold toward their brother. They weren't bothered by this. Not a bit. Their hatred had made them callous. And that's why hatred is such a dangerous thing. Because hatred can make us callous. Hatred can cause us to do things that under normal circumstances we would never do because we know better. Hatred. That's why 1 John says when you hate somebody, you've murdered them in your heart. And murderers will not enter heaven. If that is a pattern of your life, to hate people, then you are not a Christian. Because God, the one we serve, is love. Okay. So here they are eating some lunch. And they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Ishmaelites. We see in verse number 28, they are called Midianites. And so someone who doesn't believe the Bible might say, aha, there we have it, a contradiction. No, there's no contradiction here unless you're looking for it. Because the Midianites were a subset of the Ishmaelites. It's like if someone were to describe me, and they would say he's an American, and then they were to say he's a Virginian. There's no contradiction there. The Midianites were a part of the Ishmaelites. And so here they are, right? Just happened by chance, coincidence, for this group of Midianite traders to be coming along? No, it was the providence of God. God had sent these Midianites that way, that particular day, in his perfect timing to accomplish his perfect will. And that's how we've got to see our lives. Everything is in God's perfect timing to accomplish his perfect will. Okay, and so verses 26 through 28. And Judah said unto his brothers, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Then there passed by Midianite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So once again, we can speculate about why Reuben, wanted to bring his brother Joseph back to his father. And I say let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he had a noble and honorable desire. Well, here's Judah here. He appealed to his brother's greed to get them to sell Joseph to the Midianite merchantmen rather than to do what with Joseph? Than to kill him. And so someone might say, well, Judah wanted to make a little money out of this. And maybe he did. But it's a good thing that Judah stepped up. The one who is the ancestor of the Lord Jesus Christ stepped up, and he caused Joseph's life to be spared. By saying what? He said, let's make a little money off this deal, okay? It doesn't do any good if we kill him. Besides, if we sell him to the Ishmaelites, we'll never see our brother again. Yeah, he'll be a slave. He'll get lost among the slaves of Egypt, and we'll never see our brother again. Won't have to worry about that dream ever coming true. We have thwarted the will of God. But can we ever thwart the will of God? No, we cannot thwart the will of God. And we'll see that in the long picture of this. 20 pieces of silver. According to the Hammurabi Code, this is what I read, this was the price of a slave, 20 pieces of silver. Some people said that they would sell for anywhere from 15 to 30, depending on, who they were, what their skills were, and things like that. But they got the going rate for their brother, okay? How much would you sell your brother for right now? Anyway, the going rate was 20 pieces of silver, which today would be quite a bit of money. And it says they brought Joseph into Egypt. Humanly speaking, this is how Joseph ended up in Egypt as a slave. But we learn later that it was ultimately God who was orchestrating Joseph's trip into Egypt. And little did these brothers know that by selling Joseph into Egypt, they were actually preserving their own lives, and they were bringing about the fulfillment of Joseph's dreams. That's how God works. He takes all of these seemingly disjointed and coincidental things, and he accomplishes his greater will. And that's how we see, even in this world, we read the book of Revelation, we see what's supposed to happen in the end, and all these wicked people, Psalm 2, says they're trying to overthrow God and his anointed. And what does God do? It says God in the heavens laughs at them, because you're not going to overthrow the plan of God. You're not going to do it. Well, verses 29 and 30, hey, I never noticed. When did Reuben slip out? Okay. He must have gone somewhere while they were eating lunch. But anyway, verse number 29, and Reuben returned into the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. That's what you did when you were mad back then. You became like the Incredible Hulk, right? You just ripped your clothes, He was mad. He thought surely, they'd done something to Joseph. And it says here, and he returned unto his brethren and said, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? He says, whither shall I go? Where can I go now? How am I going to explain this to Dad? What have y'all done? Well, They explained to him what had happened, that he hadn't been killed. Verse number 31, they took Joseph's coat, killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. So what are we going to do to cover this thing up? The brothers dipped the multicolored coat in goat's blood. It's like a good murder mystery right here, right? Verse 32, what else did they do? And they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father, and said, This have we found. Know not whether it be thy son's coat or not. They say to their dad, this coat looks familiar, Dad. You ever seen this coat before? Is this the one? I don't know. Have you ever seen that? You recognize this coat? Of course he recognized that coat. The coat of many colors that he gave his beloved son? Absolutely. But Jacob does something that we have a tendency to do. That is, he jumped to conclusions. And that's exactly what the brothers wanted him to do. They were manipulating their dad. It says that he knew it and said, It is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. Without doubt. Without doubt. He made up his mind. An evil beast, a wild animal, has torn him into pieces. Without doubt. Sometimes we get things in our head and we think it's true. And it's not. And this was not true. But he convinced himself that his son had been killed by a wild animal. It's interesting. What goes around comes around. You ever heard that? What we sow, we're going to reap. Jacob was a deceiver in his youth. And now he is cruelly deceived himself. End of the story, right? The brothers have gotten away with murder, right? Numbers 32, verse 23 says, Be sure your sin will find you out. And it may not be in the way you expect, but they're not going to get away with murder and God not bring it to light. All right, verse 34, And Jacob rent his clothes, put sackcloth upon his loins, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, For I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Now we notice here, it says about Jacob, it says all of his sons and his daughters. We've only heard of one daughter, Dinah, right? That's the only daughter we've heard of. Remember the girl that went down to Shechem and got with this boy down there and all that sort of mess, caused a big problem for the family? Well, there are other daughters as well, but they just didn't get mentioned. So she was just one of many daughters of his. But Jacob says here, I will go down into the grave unto my son mourning. Jacob is heartbroken, and he realizes that he will continue to be heartbroken until he dies and is once again with his son Joseph. What a heartbreaking thing for a father to think that his beloved son is dead. Verse 36, And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, and an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. And so Joseph is in Egypt, and he's already starting out pretty good as a slave because he has been sold to a prominent man, Potiphar. We don't know exactly what it means that he was an officer of Pharaoh's. We don't know exactly what it means that he was captain of the guard. But we do know that he was a very prominent man in Egypt, and that is going to work toward fulfilling God's plan in Joseph's life. Any comments or questions about Joseph being sold into slavery? All right, chapter 38 is one of the twisted, perverted, dark chapters of the Bible. And you say, why is chapter 38 in here? because I think God wants us to know that when Israel and his children went to Egypt, they weren't these nice, clean-cut church people, okay? They weren't very righteous. And the reason Israel and his children went to Egypt is because for 400 years, they needed to be purified. They needed to be chastened. And they needed to get right with God. We've already seen Reuben the firstborn, right? He went into Bilhah, Jacob's handmaid, and had an immorality with her. We see Dinah, his daughter, going and being friends with the people in Shechem, the pagans. And, I think that she probably brought about in some way, or at least allowed, this relationship with the man Shechem there, this immorality. She got shacked up with him, and they're in Shechem. And then you have Simeon and Levi getting upset at how their sister was being treated in Shechem. So they do what we'd call today kind of a genocide. They just go and kill all the men. They're in Shechem. They fool them into getting circumcised. And then when they're weak, they just go in and slaughter them all. And now we're going to see Judah, right? Judah, the forefather of our Messiah. And we're going to see how twisted and messed up Judah was in chapter 38. Verse number 1. And it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned in unto a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Judah went down from his brethren. Judah began to separate himself from the rest of his family. This is always a problem. It's always a red flag. This was not only his physical family, but this was, for all of their imperfections, his spiritual family. And he's separating himself. He's putting distance between them. And it says here he turned into, his new big buddy, you might say, was a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Adullam was a Canaanite city about 12 miles southwest of Bethlehem. He became big pals with a guy there named Hira. And here is what I want to say to you today about this. Show me your friends. You can almost finish it for me. And I'll show you your future. Okay? Show me your friends, and I will show you your future. They used to say, if you lay down with dogs, you're going to get fleas. And that's where Judah is at, sadly. So verses 2 through 5. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shuhah, and he took her and went in unto her. She conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Er. And she conceived again and bare a son. She called his name Onan. And she conceived yet again and bare a son, and called his name Shelah. And he was at Chazib when she bare him. All right. So what did Judah do? He did what always causes problems. He married a Canaanite girl named Shua. And Shua, the pagan Canaanite girl, bore him 3 sons, Er, Onan, and Shelah. And so, you think about time. You've probably got going on here about 20 years where you've got Jacob going away from his family, taking up with this man named Hira, marrying this girl who is the daughter of Shua. We don't even know her name. And he has 3 sons, Er, and Onan, and Shelah. So verse number 6, Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And so Er marries Tamar, just another Canaanite girl, most likely. And Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Whatever Er did, it must have been pretty bad for God to kill him. There's a lot of sin going on in this world, even at this time in the Bible. But Er did something so wicked that God had to kill him. We don't know what it was, but it was very wicked. Verses 8 through 10, we're not going to read. It's a little graphic. But in that culture, a man's widow was given to the dead man's brother to have a child on the dead man's behalf. Onan practiced birth control so that he would not have to support a child which was considered to be his brother Er's child. And here's what verse 10 says. The thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore the Lord slew him also. So here we have, boom, the son of Judah, Er, was killed because of his wickedness. Boom, the son of Judah, Onan, was killed because of his wickedness. So verse 11, then said Judah to Tamar his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, lest perhaps he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. This is what parents often do, and it frustrates especially a pastor. You know, Er was wicked, and God killed him. Onan was wicked, and God killed him. Judah was away from God, married a pagan girl. And yet, what does Judah do? He blames the woman. He blames Tamar. Says, you know what? If I give my last son to Tamar, she's liable to kill him too. And I'm not about to do that to my son. And so, what custom would say, what God would say, is, Shua should have been given Tamar, and they should have had children for the firstborn son, Er. But they didn't do that. So we're going to find out what's a Canaanite girl like Tamar is going to do about her situation. And it's just as ugly as what we've read already. But we see here in this passage, when Christians get away from God's people and build close relationships with the world, things can quickly get messed up. And life is about to get far more complicated for Mr. Judah. And we will learn about that, Lord willing, next time.